July 2014, 11 years ago. It feels like just yesterday, but I'll never forget when my paths crossed with a little crested gecko. For whatever reason, he was no longer wanted at his previous home, so I adopted him, and we built a very special bond over the years. Even though I was always more than happy to provide the extra care and attention that he needed to thrive, deep down, I always kind of had a feeling that our time together would be cut short. Those years were a blessing that I'm thankful to have enjoyed, and I know that there's never going to be another gecko quite like Henry.
The truth is, I didn't want to make this video at all, and almost didn't. However, as I gave myself a month to process things, my sadness was gradually replaced by fond memories. I also considered how significant of an impact Henry had on SerpaDesign, and even though the reason for this video is inherently sad, it doesn't have to be negative.
It only feels right to reminisce.
Geckos weren't really on my radar until this opportunity came about. I'm guessing the little guy was around 8 months old or so at the time I got him. Don't ask me why, but for whatever reason, he just looked like a Henry. By then I had cared for many animals, and after some research, I figured it would be easy.
While true, there was a caveat. Henry needed special attention from the very beginning.
He'd hunt crickets and seek out his prepared food as you'd expect, but he rarely ate enough unless I encouraged him to eat more. We later determined hand feeding was the best option. He just was never a big eater, and I discovered just how true that really was when I got Delilah a few years later. If anything, I kind of have the opposite problem with her and have to make sure she doesn't eat too much.
I think that one of Henry's issues is that he originated from one of those big box stores.
Without getting too into the weeds, because there's a lot I could say about it, these reptiles are produced under and cared for in less than ideal conditions, which often lead to frail animals. The other is that he always had a kinked spine and bent tail.
Well, I guess he didn't always have the bent tail because he eventually dropped it one time when I was holding him and sneezed, but I digress.
I just assumed the kink was a defect since he always had it. However, I think it's possible that he actually had minor metabolic bone disease, MBD, the whole time. It can happen pretty early on and would explain the bent spine, kinked tail, and perhaps why he passed on the lower end of the crested gecko's life expectancy. Truthfully, he never gave me a reason to worry. He was always active and agile, climbing and jumping with ease, doing everything you'd expect from a healthy gecko. His weight was always normal too, despite not being a big eater. Along with that, he received the proper diet, and I later added UV lighting as more information became available. I even had him tested for parasites, which came back negative. If anything, I wonder if the specialized care I gave him allowed him to live longer, but maybe that's wishful thinking.
All I know is that the food drive, or the lack thereof, is why we ended up spending so much time together.
I would take him out every other day for feeding until he recognized the nightly care routine. Then it was nearly every day upon his request. I'd start by feeding the fish, and like clockwork, he'd almost always slap onto the glass, where he'd follow me around until I'd retrieve him. He'd immediately climb onto my hand and sit with contentment. My IG used to be flooded of pictures and videos of it when I was more active there.
Besides the times he got wacky during mating season, it's something I always look forward to, and I think it's one of the things I look back on most fondly. Occasionally I'll look back at where I began with all of this, and if there's one thing I think I've done consistently from the beginning, it's learn.
Whether that was through observation to produce better habitats around animal behaviors, improve upon old techniques or develop new ones, and strive to house things better year after year.
There's always more to learn, and the more I do, the less I realize I actually know.
It's undeniable that Henry played a significant role in all of that from his very first appearance on the channel in the 2016 Animal Room Tour. I had Vivariums long before this channel, and the oldest public video features a Vivarium build, although I wouldn't make a tutorial until the 10-gallon conversion series. They never had animals, but I later used the same techniques to convert a 20-gallon aquarium into a vivarium for Henry in 2017. This was the first time I did a build for an animal on the channel. It was great to finally see him thrive in his first naturalistic setup. It was so inspiring that I decided to get a second gecko shortly after. I knew that Delilah would need a vivarium like his as she grew, so in 2018 I took the opportunity to build custom plywood tanks for both of them. Henry flourished, which was no surprise, as I had designed it around his behaviors. These tanks were at my viewing height, which I think is one of the reasons why our bond was solidified at this time. There's something about them being able to see you head on that I think makes a real difference. Now, all of that happened from the first animal room in my parents' basement, which is nostalgic in and of itself. Later that year, I moved to my first home, and of course Henry came along. I used what I learned between then and 2021 to build another set of plywood tanks. I was able to simplify those, use new background techniques, and accommodate another adopted gecko, Cynthia. Those eventually moved to my current home in 2022, and the geckos have lived in them ever since.
I've learned even more since then, but sadly, Henry never got to see the fully realized vision of that and what I was planning to do next in the gecko's forever homes.
I'd say for the past 6 months to a year, Henry had been slowing down a bit, but he still seemed good and healthy. I knew he was aging, so I didn't think much of it. However, that was until things changed literally overnight in the last few days of his life. He became really weak and struggled to climb and just wasn't himself anymore, which was hard to watch. I did get him in to see a vet, but there really wasn't anything to be done at that point. All I could really do was watch his decline over the next few days.
That was sad, but I find comfort in this. The very last thing that we did together was the same thing that we had done so many times before. As I held him in my hand, in my spirit I knew it would be the last time, and it was. The next morning I found him exactly where I had placed him the night before. He passed away at right around 12 years old.
Having a photographic reminder of these animals is incredible, and this is one of my favorites of Henry. However, I also like giving them away to live on, as it were.
I figured there was no better place for that than by the pond through this blue Atlas cedar.
This will add a nice pop of color atop the landscape and eventually be a showcase plant in a feature I plan to add next year. They're a beautiful, slow-growing evergreen that get fairly large while maintaining a compact, sparse appearance. Now at the time, I simply liked the name Henry. I wasn't considering its association with nobility, though it was fitting. The little man had crowns over his eyes after all. The blue tufts on this tree are reminiscent of those, so it only makes sense he'd become part of such a regal tree.
Henry's been gone for about a month now, so I've had time to process things, but it never gets any easier.
Infrequent as they may be, every time it happens, I always ask myself a question. Do I still really want to keep doing this? Especially with these adopted animals. At first, I tend to think no, but I eventually come back to yes. If I'm going to be honest, I probably prefer working with unwanted animals. Giving them as good of a home as I can is a joy, but they often arrive needy and with issues, which makes me grow even closer to them, making the inevitable departure even harder. However, it's all just part of the journey, and I have to be alright with it.
Times like this always remind me that to everything there is a season. The things of this life are here today and gone tomorrow.
It's sobering, but I actually think that's a good thing. It highlights the importance of proper stewardship and the need to appreciate blessings while we have them without forming an unhealthy attachment. It all reminds me to spend more time with my other animals while they're here, and I'm encouraged to continue learning and improving my stewardship of them.
I'm hopeful for what's next, and while I'm sad that Henry won't really be a part of that, I'm happy for our time together and thankful to have had the opportunity to share it with you.